Mexico territory, a lone U.S. Marshal was given an honorable but an impossible task: defend the terrified residents of his hometown from a ruthless, utterly depraved gang of criminals recently escaped from prison. Honorable, for this was the oath he took when the badge was put on his chest, and he had every intention of keeping his word and his integrity. Impossible, because he wielded only a pair of six-shooters against a gang of 8. That and the paralyzed town folks couldn't find the necessary courage to come to the marshal's assistance. He would have to face this enemy alone. But he had lived his whole life in pursuit of what was right, and there's no need in changing his ways now, even if it meant his death. So it's midday on the main dirt street of town, and there he stands, a solitary figure representing law, justice, and principle. And down the street, fresh off the train from Santa Fe, come his antagonist. They seethe with rage. They stroll with arrogance, a true hateful 8, as they spread in single line, each one with the marshal as their target. He was the one who had put them away in the first place, and it's because of him that they have been rotting away in the territorial penitentiary for almost a decade. But now, with their newly seized freedom, they will shoot this lawman down like a rabid dog. Townspeople peep through the glass windows of the general store, through the slatted swinging doors of the saloon, from the loft of the livery stable. Their future is on the line, for only the marshal stands between them and perdition. If he falls, the whole town will be laid to waste. And they know this, but fear keeps them where they are, watching. "You're awful brave to show up like this, Marshal," says the gang leader to break the terrible tense silence in the street. "That or just plain stupid." And the whole gang laughs. "I'm going to enjoy killing you today, Marshal," the outlaw growls, with the brief humor now evaporated. "Ain't no way in 7 hells you're leaving this street today." And for the first time, the marshal speaks. "Maybe. I've lived my life and I'll die my death if it's today, but you can be sure I'll take every one of you with me if I fall." Hands hover over Schofield and Colt revolvers. Eyes dart to and fro in the terrible, tense silence. In mere seconds, it's over. The sounds of gunfire echo into terrible, tense silence once more. The smoke clears. The town clock begins to strike 12 times, and that one solitary man stands in the middle of the street, his badge catching the rays of the 12 o'clock sun. Where have you heard this story? High Noon? The classic Western starring Gary Cooper as Marshal Will Kane. You could also say that it is Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood as an avenging angel. It could be any number of prototypical Western stories, but the one that I have in mind is a little older than those. It's from the ancient Middle East, about 750 years before Jesus. It's the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal in an epic high noon showdown on top of Mount Carmel. The story is found in 1 Kings 18. Elijah is not a marshal, but he is portrayed as wearing the white hat and a badge. He's the good guy. He is up against superior odds as well, but it's not 1 versus 8. It's 1 versus 850. 850 followers of the Phoenician gods Asherah and Baal. Asherah was a fertility goddess whose main act of worship involved ritualistic prostitution. And Baal was the storm god, the god of heaven, responsible for sending rain and abundance. And when the rains or the crops failed, Baal demanded human sacrifice, typically the firstborn son of a family. These violent, destructive divinities have all these gang members following them. And there is only one public representative for Yahweh, the God of Israel. This prophet, Elijah. Others believed in Yahweh, but times being what they were, the common folk were terrified of the vicious followers of Asherah and Baal, so Elijah meets them in the street, so to speak, by himself in one final showdown. This is 1 Kings 18, 20, and 21. All the people of Israel and the prophets came to Mount Carmel, and then Elijah stood in front of them and said, "How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord, that is Yahweh, is God, follow Him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." And this was followed by a trial of fire. Whichever prophet could call down fire from heaven, a lightning strike, that prophet's God would be deemed the one and only true God. 850 cultic prophets cry and pray and lash themselves all day, while Elijah mocks them and taunts them with one of the greatest lines found in the Old Testament. He speculates that Baal is somewhere stuck on the toilet and cannot come to the phone right now. Go read that for yourself. And then Elijah offers a simple prayer. "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel." And the fire falls. The lightning strikes. And when the smoke clears, one man is left standing alive. It is Elijah. And that is as good a script as any Western you will ever watch. And now today's reading from 1 Kings 19. All of this as context. We move to the aftermath of the showdown. The prophet of God, the lone survivor, the pistol-packing, gunslinging lawman, has collapsed into a heap of suicidal hopelessness. He has what psychologists call post-event depression. Have you ever suffered from such a thing? Some people call it December 26th syndrome. The letdown effect. The after-party blues. You have all this build-up and anticipation of some major event, a celebration, a holiday, a party, a marathon, or a 5K maybe that you have been training for, and then it's all over. And when it's all over, many people feel like all the air has been let out of them. They crash back to earth depleted after all those endorphins have worn off and all that energy that they had, it just is all evaporated. In athletics, it's called gold medal syndrome. After reaching the pinnacle of success and achieving what few others have done, a great many of the most accomplished athletes, Olympian or otherwise, feel empty, lost, and depressed in the aftermath. And I think Elijah sure fits that bill. After his dramatic and total victory, we find him exhausted, alone, out in the wilderness, sitting under a broom tree, a scrub bush, wishing that he was dead. "I have had enough," Lord. I mean, have you ever had enough? Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Reminds me of a great Bob Dylan song. Mama, take this badge off of me. I can't wear it anymore. Mama, put these guns in the ground. I can't shoot them anymore. I feel like I'm knocking on heaven's door. Bob Dylan wrote that song as part of the soundtrack for the movie Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. It was written for the character Sheriff Colin Baker, played by the legendary Slim Pickens. And it plays as he sits down by the riverside, gut shot and dying. I've had enough, Lord, Elijah says, out in the desert, despondent, alone. He has reached the end of himself. And it's not just the post-victory blues that's doing the talking. Jezebel is talking too. Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: may the gods strike me and kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. Elijah can single-handedly defeat nearly 1,000 combatants. And there he is on that mountainside like a tree planted by the waters, an oak tree of strength, this fearless lawman, and one woman sends him a nasty text message and he wishes he was dead. We can understand. Is that a hallelujah over there? All right. But in his defense, Jezebel was a nasty piece of work. And her name, all these centuries later, endures as the female icon of fear, doom, and dread. When's the last time you met a little girl named Jezebel? A friend of mine had a pit bull named Jezebel. But I've never met a little girl named Jezebel. The only time the name is used is in the form of an insult, a slur, to denigrate a woman. That may do no injustice to the original bearer of that name, but rarely is Jezebel an appropriate title for someone you might encounter today. A little bit more about her. Jezebel was the foreign queen of King Ahab of Israel. Foreign, not as a derogatory term, but simply that she was not a Jew. She was Phoenician. The Phoenicians were a coastal people occupying the Mediterranean beaches of Lebanon and Syria. Her and her husband's marriage was one of treaty and alliance, not love and affection. It was an arranged marriage for political and military reasons, binding the northern king of Israel and the Phoenicians together in a strategic union. And that was a problem for the purist, such as Elijah, who saw this as terrible compromise, joining the people of Yahweh with those who did not follow Yahweh. And this is confirmed when Jezebel brings with her foreign gods, the aforementioned Asherah and Baal. So Jezebel is seen as a brazen, spiritually corrupting force. She is also deadly, adept at arranging murder-for-hire schemes. And when the day finally comes where she meets justice, as her executioners are on the way to take her head, she fixes her hair, puts on her makeup, has a fresh manicure, sits down with a glass of wine, and says, "Bring it on." This is no wilting flower, defiantly refusing to run away or to beg for mercy. So this parenthesis, if you'll allow me. To use the defamation of Jezebel toward a woman is no small act of name-calling. It is to label someone spiritually corrupt, murderous, audaciously combative. It is not a phrase you use for a woman you simply disagree with, or for some woman who doesn't meet your conceived boundaries of what a woman should or should not be. A personal story. When I was a youngster, there was a divorce in the church I grew up in, and this was extremely, extremely rare. Hard-shelled, fundamental Mountain Baptists didn't have divorces. Now, I went through a divorce, and one of the people who raised me came to me when I filed for that divorce and said to me, "Well, Ronnie, it would just be better if you killed her than divorced her." You picking up what I'm laying down? This didn't happen. This did not happen. And this woman has chosen to leave her husband. And a big prayer meeting was called. It was a little boy. And she was the subject of that prayer meeting. That she would repent of her wayward ways and get back to her husband. And it was the first time in any context that I had heard a woman referred to as a Jezebel. I was young. But even as a youngster, I knew the Bible stories, and I knew what they were saying. Fast forward 10 years. My senior year in high school, I'm working at Walmart. This woman who had left her husband is now my coworker. I had not seen her since I was a child. She explained to me that yes, she had in fact left her husband and filed for divorce because he was a serial adulterer. And that he had moved relationship to relationship to relationship. And when she had had enough, she had had enough. And she lost her entire religious community because she did something to protect herself. That is not a Jezebel. And to refer to a person like that is a sin by using that title. And I have encountered people in churches where a man disagrees with a woman over some kind of church business. If you get him alone, he'll say something like, "Well, she's just a Jezebel." And at some point in time, I found enough courage one time when a man said that to me. I said, "Do you mean that she's a painted prostitute and a hit man to do her dirty work and worships a fertility god?" Close of parenthesis. I'll move on. Jezebel was no woman Elijah wanted to have a beef with regardless. She was a real, formidable, deadly enemy. So Elijah takes to the road. He takes to the road feeling bad, real bad. And it's here that an angel of the Lord finds him. Malach is the Hebrew word, a messenger, a representative, an endorsed, delegated, appointed, commissioned spokesperson for God. And what does this angel, this speaker for the Lord, say to Elijah? The angel says to Elijah, "Will you quit being so silly? Now just shake off this despondency and get back to work." No. Quit crying like some kind of weakling, you little snowflake. No. Elijah, if you had just prayed longer and believed better and tried harder and trusted further, none of this would have happened to you. No. I cannot believe you would have a crisis of faith like this and just throw away your testimony. No. Here is how you know a true angel of God has found you. This messenger gave Elijah only what he needed: a nap, a meal, and a cold drink. Thanks be to God. And then these words, "Get up and eat, because the journey will be too much for you." As a kid, from the age of 11 or 12 years old, I would work every summer and spring break on my uncle's chicken farm, where my grandmother also lived in a little clapboard house. And I would want to sleep in every morning just as long as I could because all my other friends were out for summer having fun. And here I am in the heat and the dust and the smell of a commercial chicken house. And Uncle Lamar and Aunt Runette, you could clock them like the sun. At 7 a.m., you better be reported for duty. My grandmother would get me up early. Oh, I wanted to sleep. And she would get me up early and she'd say, "Get dressed, son. Get in here and eat your breakfast." And it would be a massive breakfast. Biscuits, gravy, bacon or sausage, grits, sometimes a real treat that I don't have time to go into, chocolate gravy and biscuits. You got to ask me about that later. And she would make sure that you ate everything on your plate. And she'd say, "Runette, can't have you falling out. There's work to be done. And it'll be a long time before you get to eat again." And you would fall out if you didn't eat a good breakfast. And it was a long time before we ate again. But when you left her table, you were fortified. And nobody gained any weight because everybody works so damn hard. The journey ahead will be too much for you, and it will be sometimes. Even for youngsters taking on a mission with Cru. And I can tell you, for new parents staring at that new baby wondering, what have we done? For those in the throes of career woes, for those navigating the dangerous transitional waters of midlife, for those in later life wondering if the life they have lived really mattered, if they have any more to give, for those who have been champions, for those who have felt like nothing but losers, for those disappointed, discouraged, despondent, confused, misused, and abused, the journey will be too much for you sometimes. And enough of this lie that God will never put on you more than you can stand. That's nowhere near an accurate statement, and it will not hold up to thoughtful theological or experiential analysis. Sometimes life will collapse on you with the weight of multiple lifetimes. There will just be too many challenges, too many burdens, too much tragedy. It happens sometimes with the news of a single solitary catastrophe, or with the slow accumulation of day-to-day weariness like silent falling snow. Either way, sometimes it is all more than you can take. Sometimes life will break you. I love this quote from Ernest Hemingway. It's from In Farewell to Arms. The world kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. The world breaks everyone, but afterward many are strong at the broken places. Life will be more than you can stand. Life will bring to bear more than you can bear. Only then does God's grace become more than sufficient. God's grace, as the Apostle Paul would say in the New Testament, is made perfect in our weaknesses. When we are weak, we become strong. Not because we manufacture a robustness that we didn't think we had, but because an outside spirit becomes an inner strength. Because when we are at our lowest, and sometimes not a minute before, God comes to us with what we need to get up and to go on. How does this happen? I'm not exactly sure. I wish I could tell you that a flaming angel cake baking messenger of God will show up at your lowest depleted moment with hot cakes from heaven. More than likely, it will just be your neighbor with a casserole. And he or she will be no less an angel than if it were Gabriel himself. I wish I could guarantee you a holy encounter with the living God come to refresh you in your desert personally and powerfully, but it just might be the words of a friend or even a stranger that penetrates the dust and falls like fresh cold water on your soul. He or she will be God's messenger just the same, doing God's work just the same. even if you do not recognize it at the time. All I know, as I read the history of our ancestors here in the Scriptures, and as I review my own life and the lives of those who kept faith to the end and beyond, is that God has a way of showing up and picking up His children when they have reached the very end of themselves. There is something about coming to the absolute end of strength, when another step cannot be taken, when another war cannot be fought, when another threat cannot be answered, when another precept cannot be believed, when another creed cannot be recited, when another day cannot be faced. Only then does God become God to the one who desperately needs God. I'll finish with a few words from Richard Rohr. I'm sorry if my sermon's a little longer today. I've had a few weeks off. Richard Rohr has been a great teacher to me over the last 15 years. He and I are so different. He's old enough to be my father. He's a Franciscan priest. And yet he and I have come to so many similar conclusions. And one of those convictions and conclusions has to do with the spirituality of the 12 steps. His experience has been mine. Will you listen to his words? I truly believe that the 12-step program will go down in history as America's greatest and most unique contribution to the history of spirituality. Americans want a spirituality that is relevant, that changes lives, and that really makes a difference in the world. And for many, the 12 steps do just that. The entrance requirement for an AA meeting is not capacity, but deep need, just as it should be. AA had the courage to recognize that you don't come to God by doing it right, you come to God by doing it wrong, and then falling into an infinite mercy. But until you bottom out and come to the limits of your own fuel supply, there is no reason for you to switch to a higher octane. You will not learn to actively draw upon the Spirit of God until your usual resources are depleted and revealed as inadequate to the task. In fact, you will not even know there is a higher power until your own power and resources utterly fail you. But then, you are finally ready to begin. And your religion can become a living spirituality. May God give each of us the gift of weakness and depletion that we might find the strength of God.